There I was, standing at Stellini's entrance, the most exclusive restaurant in town, while the maitre d' gave me a look mixing pity and embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson, but I don't see your name on the reservation. It just says, Wilson family, 5 people. My stomach sank. It was my in-laws' 30th wedding anniversary, and as the wife of their oldest son, I was supposed to be included. Through the glass door, I spotted the table where Nathan, Vivian, my father-in-law Robert, and Nathan's sisters, Brooke and Taylor, were already seated, champagne flutes raised in a toast. There must be some mistake, I insisted, trying to keep my cool. My husband is right over there. Let me check again, but the maitre d' consulted his digital list. The reservation was made in person by Mrs. Vivian Wilson, and she specified 5 people. In that moment, I caught Vivian's glance in my direction. A subtle, triumphant smile spread across her lips before she turned her attention back to the conversation. It wasn't an error. It was deliberate. 7 years of marriage and I was still treated like an outsider. The working-class girl who, according to Vivian, hit the jackpot with her precious Wilson heir. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. While I was wallowing in the humiliation of turning around and leaving, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Olivia? Olivia Parker, is that you?" I turned and saw Ryan Bennett in his impeccable Italian suit. "Ryan? Oh my God, it's been so long. At least 8 years." He smiled, wrapping me in a warm hug. "Since you left my office to start your own consulting firm." Ryan had been my mentor when I started out in finance, a brilliant investor who taught me practically everything I know. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Well, actually," he gestured toward the restaurant. "I'm the owner now. I invested in Stellini's 2 years ago." The maitre d' suddenly widened his eyes, looking nervous. "Mr. Bennett, is there a problem with the reservation?" "This woman," Ryan said, putting his arm around my shoulders, "is one of the brightest financial minds I've ever met. My protege. And you're telling me she doesn't have a table? It's her family's reservation. Prepare the captain's table," Ryan interrupted, "and a bottle of the 2008 Dom Perignon from my personal cellar." The maitre d' quickly nodded and walked away. Ryan smiled at me. "Let's show them what a VIP guest really looks like." I walked through the restaurant next to Ryan, feeling all eyes on us. The maitre d' led us not to the Wilson family's table, but to the best table in the restaurant, a chic, private area overlooking the lit-up garden. I noticed Vivian's expression change from satisfaction to disbelief as we passed her table. "Olivia?" Nathan got up, confused. "I thought you said you'd come straight from the office." "And I did," I replied calmly. "Apparently there was a mix-up with the reservation. Luckily, I bumped into an old friend." Vivian quickly interjected. "It must have been a restaurant mistake. Clearly, I asked for 6 seats." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Ryan Bennett, the owner. Our system is pretty accurate with client specifications." Vivian's face flushed slightly. "Well, regardless, Olivia should definitely join. Our family table, don't you think?" "Actually," Ryan signaled, and 2 waiters started rearranging the Wilson family's table. "I was thinking of merging the 2 tables. As the owner, I rarely get the chance to dine with old friends." "You and Olivia are friends?" Vivian said, as if it were unbelievable. "Mentor and mentee," Ryan replied, pulling a chair for me at the now extended table. "Olivia interned at my firm before starting her own consulting business. One of the best decisions I ever made was hiring her." The silence that followed was broken only by the clatter of cutlery and glasses being rearranged. Nathan looked uncomfortable. His sisters exchanged curious glances, and Robert, my father-in-law, just watched his wife with a cautious expression. "Olivia never mentioned this job," Vivian finally commented, her tone clearly suggesting I was making up a story to impress her. "Probably because she's too modest," Ryan replied as they poured the champagne over us. "You know, she practically rebuilt the portfolio of 3 of our biggest clients during the 2017 crisis." "Ryan," I tried to interject, but he continued. "The truth is, I felt a significant loss when she left to start her own firm, but I completely understood. Talents like hers don't stay in the background for long." Vivian forced a smile. "It's fascinating, really. But I suppose after meeting Nathan, those professional ambitions became secondary. After all, the Wilson family enterprises certainly provide enough stability." I was about to swallow my retort, as I always did when I noticed the obvious disdain in her voice. 7 years of similar comments about my background, my education at a public university, my nice little job that, in her words, was just a hobby compared to the Wilson family business. Actually, Vivian, I replied calmly, setting my glass on the table. It's exactly the opposite. Nathan nearly choked on his champagne, giving me a warning look which I ignored. The initial investment for the expansion of Wilson Investments came from my consulting firm, just like the money for renovating the Tribeca apartment and the boat you all love in the summers. The silence at the table was almost palpable. Brooke and Taylor stopped whispering. Robert slowly lowered his fork, and Vivian stared at me as though I'd just spoken some alien language. "Don't be ridiculous," Vivian finally said, releasing a forced laugh while glancing at Nathan for confirmation. My husband kept his eyes fixed on his plate, a muscle tensing in his jaw. "Nathan?" she insisted. "Mom, can we not do this here?" he murmured. Something snapped inside me then. It wasn't anger, nor resentment. It was clarity, clear and undeniable. At every awkward dinner, every nasty comment, every condescending look over the past 7 years, Nathan had never, even once, stood up for me. There were always excuses. "That's just how she is. She's from another generation. You're being too sensitive." Noticing the tension, Ryan tried to steer the conversation to a neutral topic, but it was too late. "Actually," I continued, feeling a strange calm wash over me, "Wilson Investments was on the verge of bankruptcy when I started dating Nathan. It was my restructuring plan that saved the company, and it was my money I earned with my nice little job, that financed everything you think Nathan achieved on his own." Robert looked at his son with a mix of surprise and disappointment. "Is that true?" Nathan remained silent, confirming everything with his inability to contradict me. I calmly stood up, placing the napkin on the table. "Ryan, the dinner looks wonderful, but I've completely lost my appetite." "Olivia," Nathan finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "No," I interrupted softly. "For the first time in 7 years, I have absolutely nothing to say to you." Seeing the curious looks from other customers, I smiled politely at Ryan and added, "We need to set up a lunch to catch up. There are some new investments I'd like to discuss with you." As I walked toward the exit, I felt a huge weight lifting off my shoulders. Years of putting up a facade to protect my husband's fragile ego. Years of enduring Vivian's disdain. Years of downplaying my own achievements. All to keep a peace that never really existed. The cold night air slapped me awake as I left Stellini's. I stopped on the sidewalk and took a deep breath, feeling my whole body shake, not with sadness or shame, but with a strange sense of freedom. My phone rang. Nathan, obviously. I rejected the call and opened my ride app. While waiting for the car, I dialed another number. "Dr. Olivia Parker," I answered almost automatically. "Olivia, it's Margaret. Sorry for calling so late." Margaret. Winters had been my lawyer for years, handling mainly my consulting firm's contracts. A brilliant woman in her 60s who had discreetly advised me on prenuptial agreements when I married Nathan, even though I ignored her advice back then. "No, it's perfect," I replied. "I'm free to talk. The Apex Capital contract is finalized. They accepted all our terms." On any other day, that news would have been the highlight of my month. A 9-figure client that would turn my consulting firm into one of the most respected names in the market. But at that moment, I had other priorities. "Margaret, I need to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow. It's personal." There was a brief pause. "I understand. Does it have to do with Nathan?" "Yes. I want to start divorce proceedings." Another pause. This time longer. "Well, I must admit I'm not totally surprised. Do you remember that envelope I left with you 3 years ago? The sealed document you told me to open only when I made a final decision?" "Exactly. Maybe it's time to take a look inside. Come to my office at 8 a.m. We'll have some privacy." When I hung up, my car had already arrived. On the way home, I made 3 more calls. To my bank, to temporarily freeze our joint accounts. To my assistant to cancel my appointments for the next morning. And to Lisa, my best friend since college. "Liv, are you okay?" Lisa answered, worried about the late call. "I'm getting a divorce," I said simply. "Thank God," she replied without hesitation. "Do you want me to come over?" "Not yet. I'm going to spend the night sorting some things out. Tomorrow I have a meeting with Margaret. Don't take too long updating me. And Liv, I'm proud of you." When I got home, our luxury. Penthouse in Manhattan. I went straight to my home office. I opened the wall-embedded safe and pulled out the sealed envelope Margaret had given me 3 years ago when I started noticing the imbalance in my marriage. When I opened it, I found exactly what she promised. Meticulous documentation of all. My investments in Nathan's businesses. Contracts where my name had been strategically included as the majority investor and owner, and a detailed plan to reclaim my assets if the marriage ended. Margaret had always been cautious. When I bought the apartment and put Nathan's name on the deed to appease his pride, she made sure I legally held the property by using one simple but effective trick. A holding company that I owned 100% was the true owner. Nathan only enjoyed the benefits by virtue of our marriage. I spent the next few hours organizing documents, transferring important files to secure servers, and removing valuable personal items, including family jewelry from my mother that Vivian always criticized as too outdated. When I finished, it was already past 3 in the morning. I packed a small bag with the essentials and placed it in the garage car, an Audi I bought with my own money, which Nathan rarely used because he preferred his Porsche. I left the Porsche keys on a note on the kitchen table. Nathan, I'll be at Margaret Winter's office at 8 a.m. to discuss our divorce terms. If you want a civil resolution, show up with your lawyer. Olivia. I didn't sleep in our bed that night. I chose the office sofa instead, surrounded by the symbols of everything I built on my own over the years. I woke up at 6, took a quick shower, and got dressed in my favorite suit, a navy Armani I bought to celebrate my first 7-figure contract. I was about to leave when I heard the front door open. Nathan stumbled in, still wearing last night's clothes, smelling of booze and expensive women's perfume. Olivia, he said, surprised to see me with my crossbody bag and car keys in my hand. Where did you spend the night? I came back to the apartment and you weren't there. I was here the whole time, I replied calmly. In the office. He ran, his hand through his disheveled hair. Look, about last night. My mom went too far, I know. She shouldn't have messed with the reservation like that. And what did you do about it? I asked firmly. What could I do? You know how she is. Exactly. I know how she is. And I know how you are. Unable to stand up to her, even when she publicly humiliates me. Nathan sighed and flopped onto the living room sofa. Don't over-dramatize. It was just a misunderstanding with the reservation. A deliberate misunderstanding. Just like all the other misunderstandings over the past 7 years. He noticed the small bag by my side. Are you going somewhere? I'm leaving this farce we call a marriage. Nathan let out an incredulous laugh. Come on, Liv. You're exaggerating. It was just another family fight. No, I replied sharply. It wasn't a family fight. It was yet another demonstration that you never really considered me part of your family. He got up, trying a different approach, coming closer with that charming look that used to work in the early years. You're tired, I'm hungover. Let's talk after we've both had some rest, okay? Meet me at Margaret's office at 8, and bring your lawyer. His expression hardened. Lawyer? Are you seriously talking divorce? I am. That's when Nathan's posture completely changed. His smile disappeared, replaced by a calculating look I rarely saw. Fine, if that's what you want, Olivia. But think carefully before doing something stupid. Wilson Investments is a family business. My name is on everything. Really? I asked, unable to hide a sad smile. Maybe you should check that out. What do you mean? Everything you think you own, the company, this apartment, even your precious boat, was bought with my money, through my companies. You're just a pretty face for investors who'd never suspect that a humble girl like me was really in charge. He visibly paled. You're bluffing. I opened my folder and handed him a copy of the documents I had spent the night reviewing. 51% of Wilson Investments belongs to me. A holding company that I solely own holds this apartment. And as for the boat, well, that was a generous gift on my part, I admit. Nathan skimmed through the documents, his face going from disbelief to anger. This ain't gonna stay like this. My dad knows judges, senators, and I'm sure they'd love to know that the prestigious Wilson family was practically bankrupt until I showed up, right? That the perfect heir was nothing but an incompetent who almost destroyed the family legacy? I'm sure your dad will be especially interested in those details. You don't understand, he argued, now desperate. My mom's gonna lose it. My whole family will disown me. That's your problem, Nathan. It always has been. I grabbed my bag and walked to the door, For 7 years, I was afraid I wasn't enough for your family. Now I realize you were never enough for me. As I reached the door, he made one last attempt. This is about last night, isn't it? About that ex-boss of yours? Are you seeing him? Or something? I turned one last time, locking eyes with him. This is about 7 years of cowardice, Nathan. 7 years of watching you smile while your mom treated me like trash. 7 years of funding your dreams while you belittled mine. And with that, I slammed the door, leaving behind not just the apartment, but all the little deaths I suffered every single day in this marriage. Margaret's office was as immaculate as ever, with a view of Central Park. When I got there, she had already prepared all the necessary documents, and a team of legal assistants was working furiously in an adjacent room. "Olivia," she greeted me with a quick hug, something you rarely get from someone so professional. "You look different." "I feel different," I admitted, like I've just woken up from a long dream. "Well, let's make sure you wake up with everything that's rightfully yours. We went over all the documentation all night. Your position is extremely strong." I sat in the leather chair across from her desk as she served me a cup of coffee. "Actually," continued Margaret, "I'm impressed with your foresight, keeping majority control of the company through separate transactions, setting up the holding for the property. You've always been more strategic than you let on. I learned from the best." I smiled, raising my cup toward her. At 8:15, the receptionist announced the arrival of Nathan, not accompanied by a lawyer, but by Vivian. My mother-in-law, soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law, paraded through the office as if she owned the place, scrutinizing every detail with barely concealed disdain. "Mrs. Wilson," Margaret greeted coolly, "I don't recall inviting you to this meeting." "Where my son is involved, I'm involved," declared Vivian, sitting down without being invited. "And clearly he needs guidance in dealing with this situation." Nathan looked like he'd aged 10 years since our last conversation. He sat next to his mother, avoiding my gaze. "I assume you didn't bring a lawyer?" I asked him. "We don't need lawyers to solve family problems," Vivian interrupted. "This little crisis can easily be resolved with a mature conversation." Margaret smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "Mrs. Wilson, as Dr. Parker's lawyer, I must warn you this meeting has a legal character. If your son chose not to bring legal representation, that's his choice, but I strongly suggest he reconsider." "Dr. Parker?" Vivian repeated mockingly. What a pretentious title for someone who's just made a good match. Before I could respond, Margaret placed a thick folder on the table. "Perhaps this will help clear up a few misunderstandings, Mrs. Wilson." The folder contained everything: bank statements, contracts, transfers, capital injections, the entire financial history of my marriage, meticulously documented. "As you can see," Margaret explained clinically, "Dr. Parker invested around $4.3 million in Wilson Investments between 2017 and 2020, becoming the majority shareholder with 51% of the stock. Additionally, the Manhattan property is registered under Parker Holdings LLC, of which she is the sole owner." Vivian browsed the documents, her face gradually growing paler. Nathan looked completely defeated. "This is impossible," Vivian finally said. "Nathan would never accept such conditions." "He not only accepted them," I replied calmly, "he practically begged for them. When we met, Wilson Investments had lost 60% of its market value. The debts from poor management were about to drive the company into bankruptcy." Nathan finally found the courage to speak. "Mom, I tried telling you several times about our financial situation, but you and Dad always changed the subject. You didn't want to know the truth." "The truth," I continued, "is that I saved your family's company by investing every cent I earned from my consulting, and in return, I was treated like an outsider for 7 years." Vivian recomposed herself, straightening her posture. "Well, if it's money you want, we can discuss a deal. The Wilson family has connections you can't even imagine. Your little business wouldn't last a month without our name to open doors." Margaret laughed openly this time. "Mrs. Wilson, perhaps you're not aware, but Dr. Parker's consulting firm manages a portfolio of $2.7 billion. Meanwhile, Wilson Investments, without the clients she brought, manages about $340 million. Mathematically speaking, she doesn't need your name at all." The silence that followed was almost tangible. Vivian looked at her son as if he were a complete stranger. "Nathan, say something," she practically ordered. He looked up, defeated. "What do you want, Olivia?" I want my freedom, I replied simply. I keep my 51% of the company, but you can remain as CEO, under some strict conditions that Margaret will detail. The apartment and its contents stay with me, except for your personal items which you can retrieve under supervision. In exchange, I won't demand any compensation for the undocumented transfers you made to your personal accounts over the last 3 years. What transfers? Vivian immediately asked. The ones that financed the apartment for your mistress in Tribeca, I replied calmly, watching the shock on her face. And the expensive gifts he gave to several women over the years. Nathan slumped even further in his chair, devastated by the revelation. I took no pleasure in exposing his infidelities, but it was necessary to reveal the true nature of our marriage. These terms are generous, considering the circumstances, concluded Margaret, sliding a set of documents toward Nathan. I suggest you get a lawyer and review everything carefully. We have a preliminary hearing scheduled for next week. The following weeks passed in a blur of meetings, documents, and negotiations. As expected, the Wilson family tried to contest almost everything, but Margaret was unyielding. Every legal maneuver from their side had a counter already prepared. As the process unfolded, I decided to temporarily move into a hotel. I couldn't stand staying in an apartment full of false memories any longer. Lisa visited me often, bringing homemade food and a sense of normality that I desperately needed. "How are you really feeling?" she asked one night, as we shared a bottle of wine on the hotel terrace. "Strangely at peace," I replied after a moment's thought. "Like finally putting down a heavy bag I've been carrying for years. You realize you're rich, right? Like, absurdly rich." I laughed. "I've always been rich. The difference is, now I don't have to pretend I'm not." "And the Wilsons. Any news?" I sighed, pouring a little more wine for both of us. "Robert is furious, apparently more with Nathan than with me. Finding out the family business was failing and that it was saved by the daughter-in-law they despised really bruised his ego." "And Vivian?" "Vivian sent an email." I picked up my phone and showed the message to Lisa. "Olivia, I've always known there was something calculating about you. Now I see I underestimated your ambition. No matter what roles you have, remember, we're Wilsons. This city has belonged to us for generations. You might have your documents, but we have the history. In the end, you'll always be the working-class girl who tried to climb up by marrying my son." Lisa rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, she is really unbearable." "What did you say?" "Nothing," I smiled. "Some people aren't even worth the effort of a response." 3 weeks after starting the divorce process, Ryan called me. "I've heard rumors about you and Nathan," he said bluntly. "The financial circles love gossip." "I guess so," I replied, sitting in my new temporary office in the hotel. "Want to have dinner with me tomorrow? No pressure, just 2 old friends catching up. I promise it won't be at Stellini's," he added with a laugh. I accepted his invitation. The next day, Ryan took me to a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. Authentic, discreet, and cozy. "So," he began after we ordered, "the legendary Olivia Parker is finally free. You knew about my situation with Nathan?" He shrugged. "I suspected. I know your worth, Olivia. I always found it strange how you downplayed your achievements when you were with him. It never fit the brilliant woman I knew you to be. We talked for hours, about business, future plans, and eventually about relationships. I'm just not ready for that," I admitted, when the conversation took a more personal turn. "I just got out of a marriage. I need to rediscover who I am first." "Totally understandable," he replied without hesitation. "But when you're ready, whether it's for business or something else, my door is always open." Exactly 1 month after that fateful night at Stellini's, I got the news I was waiting for. The judge had approved our divorce settlement. Nathan accepted all the terms, probably realizing that any prolonged battle would only expose even more of the Wilsons' financial decline. The next day, I signed the final documents in Margaret's office. When she handed me the pen, I felt a slight tremble in my hands. "Nervous?" she asked. "No," I replied, realizing the truth in my words. Just wondering why I waited so long. I signed my name, my maiden name, Olivia Parker, and handed back the papers. "Congratulations, Dr. Parker," Margaret smiled, raising a small champagne glass that her assistant had brought. "You're officially divorced and about $7.4 million richer, based on the asset appraisal." We cheered silently, 2 women who understood The value of hard-won independence. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. 1 month after the divorce was finalized, I moved into my new apartment, a spacious Tribeca loft with a view of the Hudson. Smaller than the penthouse I shared with Nathan, but entirely mine. Decorated to my taste with no compromises. My consulting firm was booming like never before. The inadvertent publicity from my high-profile divorce ended up attracting new clients who were interested in the woman secretly running one of the most traditional investment companies in the city. On a quiet Sunday morning, while I was savoring my coffee on the balcony, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, but answered. "Olivia?" Nathan's voice sounded desperate. "I need to talk to you." "I'm busy, Nathan. Please, it's important. The company is facing serious problems. 3 of our biggest clients have pulled their investments this week. And how does that concern me? I'm just a silent shareholder." "Now." He took a deep breath. "You know those clients. They trusted you, not me. Ever since you left, they've been uneasy. Maybe you should have thought about that before." "Liv, please." His voice broke. "I tried to make things work, but I can't without you. My dad is threatening to remove me as CEO. My mom barely talks to me since she found out about everything." I closed my eyes, taking in his words. A tiny part of me felt sorry for him, but most of me remembered every humiliation, every night I cried alone, every time he stayed silent while his mom put me down. "I'm sorry, Nathan, but I can't help. As a shareholder, I'm willing to sell my shares to you or your dad at a fair price. That's the only help I can offer." "You don't understand. We don't have the liquidity to buy your shares. The company is bleeding money." "Then I suggest you find a creative solution. You're a Wilson after all. Your family has history. Olivia, don't be vengeful. It's not revenge, Nathan. It's business. Contact my lawyers if you want to discuss selling my shares." Hung up before he could answer. Seconds later, I received a message from Vivian. "You destroyed this family. I hope you're happy." I blocked her number, and after a moment of reflection, blocked Nathan's too. Some chapters need to be completely closed for new ones to begin. That same afternoon, I received a bouquet of purple orchids, my favorites. The card simply read, "For new beginnings. Dinner on Friday? Ryan." I smiled, but didn't reply immediately. There was time now. Time to rediscover my own desires without the constant shadow of others' approval. Instead, I called Lisa. "Hey, how about a trip to Italy next month? We've always wanted to see Tuscany." "Are you serious?" Lisa asked, excited. "Absolutely. No more putting off dreams." After hanging up, I walked over to the shelf where I'd kept a small wooden box, a gift from my grandmother when I graduated. Inside was an old sapphire brooch that belonged to my great-grandmother, an immigrant who came to the US with nothing but determination. Vivian always mocked that jewelry, calling it cheap costume jewelry. Now, I proudly pinned it on my coat, a symbol of the strong lineage of women I come from. As I watched the sunset over the Hudson, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Years of trying to fit into a mold that was never made for me. The pain of dimming my light so others wouldn't feel overshadowed. Some people called my story a vengeful success. I saw it simply as poetic justice, the natural result of years of suppressing my worth to keep a marriage that only existed on the surface. I picked up my phone and finally replied to Ryan's message. "Friday works. But this time, I choose the restaurant." I smiled to myself, savoring the freedom of my own choices. There was no longer any need to shrink myself to accommodate someone else's fragile ego. No more silent humiliations to endure. For the first time in years, I breathed completely free, not as the Wilson daughter-in-law, not as Nathan's wife, but simply as Olivia Parker. And I discovered that this woman, with all her imperfect, authentic strength, was more than enough. She was exactly who I always wanted to be. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this.